Hey guys, welcome back. Good to see you. I wanted to say before I start that I'm thinking about all of you. Certainly, we're all in quarantine, and your mental health, your physical well-being's on my mind, and I miss all of you guys as well. So let's resume with last time's content. We talked about the Gallipoli campaign as a hugely influential World War I campaign. I gave you two reasons last time as to why Gallipoli was so significant. Number one, we do see the dismissal of Winston Churchill. That was the first impact. Number two had to do with this sort of galvanization, germination, coming together of Anzac. They're both two new countries here, Australia and New Zealand. With their performance, despite the loss at Gallipoli, we see this bedrock, this foundational piece of who Anzac was to become as two separate independent nations down the road. Okay, so the birth of Anzac, the creation of their national identity. And guys, again, every year, April 25th is Anzac Day to this day. Some say it's a day of drunken revelry, but really they celebrate all that is good about their two nations and their performance historically in this war. They drink gunfire breakfast. They toast the memories of those who served at Gallipoli and other conflicts over the years. Two is the forging of national consciousness or identity for Anzac. Number three, this is now new information. Number three, as you might know, the Ottoman Turks do lose this war. Okay, the Triple Alliance, the Ottoman Turks do lose World War I. But we see the birth of a new nation state. Out of the ashes of the Ottomans, we're going to see the birth of Turkey in the 1920s. What I would say about Gallipoli is that it really represents the greatest aspirations of the Ottomans and then the future of Turkey as well. Again, they gain a new great military leader. They fight heroically. You know, we see the meteoric rise of Ataturk, and it begins on the shores of Gallipoli. So Turkey, they gain a performance to point back to with honor, and they gain a new leader in Ataturk at Gallipoli. So in the 20s, we see the birth of Turkey as well post-war. Number four has to do with Russia. Now, as you know, because England and France were unable to control the Dardanelles, unable to control the Black Sea during the Gallipoli campaign, the remainder of the war, Russia was unable to receive food and supplies and military aid and medical care. The remainder of the war, because of the fail at Gallipoli, Russia was in a very, very perilous state the next couple of years because of Gallipoli. They were really a fledgling army during this time period. So those four impacts were all very significant because of the Gallipoli campaign of 1915. Let's go now into the year 1917. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. 1917, referred to by historians as the darkest year of World War I for the Triple Entente. I'll say it again, it's the darkest year of World War I for the Triple Entente, 1917. Number one has to do, again, with Russia, okay? March of 1917, we're going to see the abdication, the forced abdication or stepping down of the Romanov Tsar, Nicholas II. So Nicholas II is forced to step down in the wake of tremendous pressure. Russia was a disaster on the military front, bad generals, lack of supplies, lack of leadership, but also rough times for Russia on the home front as well. So lack of food, abject poverty, and a growing discontent and lack of respect for Nicholas II and his family culminates in him stepping down. A few months later, we're going to see another shift. We go from a government that was decidedly pro-war under Nicholas to a new government. November of 1917, we see the rise of the Communist Party in Russia under Vladimir Lenin and his communist cronies, Lenin and his friends, again, they now revolt. They take over the government in November of 1917. They see World War I as being a war that really promotes imperialism and capitalism. Immediately, Lenin begins to negotiate with the Germans to get the Russians out of World War I. And this culminates about 2 months later with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is going to be Russia surrendering, getting out of the war, suing for peace, and getting out of World War I. So point number one has to do with a tremendous drop in morale. Drop in morale. We see here that the English, the French, the Entente has to now deal with the reality they have lost Russia in this war, and it hurts morale in a big way. Number two actually correlates and connects in some way with number one. Number two, we could describe this as finally, Otto von Bismarck can now rest in peace. Number two is the end of the two-front war. Once Germany defeats Russia and they sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, what can Germany do? They can bring all those regiments of men that were based on the Eastern Front, now bring them to the Western Front, and the numbers now are really stacked against the English and the French. There is the emergence of all kinds of new military folks that were brought from the East who now appear with increased numbers on the Western Front. So again, number two is that there was the end of a two-front war. Thirdly, the third reason for the darkest year of the war for the Entente has to do with the surrender of Serbia and Romania. Romania out of the war, Serbia out of the war. They both lost to Austria-Hungary, and now we see the Entente has lost a major bulk of their Balkan Peninsula arsenal during the war. Okay, they lose both Serbia and Romania in 1917. Fourth and finally, has to do with the Italians. The Italians should have been an asset to the Entente during World War I. They were a huge liability. They fought horribly. They were a disaster during this war. As you know, after generations, decades of belonging to the Triple Alliance, they were coerced, they were tempted by the Entente with the promise of land in Dalmatia, and on the eve of war, they do join up with the Triple Entente. They fought really bad, guys. So, guys, visualize this, and you'll see the images later on Schoology in my PowerPoint, but we're going to see in the Italian Alps in 1916 and 17, Italy fights miserably against Germany. And Germany had this group known as the Alpine Corps. The Alpine Corps was a subdivision in the German army, and they were predisposed. They were trained to fight under very, very perilous, hazardous conditions, like the mountains. There's all kinds of great imagery of the Alpine Corps for Germany fighting Italy at the Battle of Caporetto, and the Germans' Alpine Corps, they're pushing forward on snowshoes, they're wearing cross-country skis, they're hoisting pieces of artillery up the face of very steep peaks in the Italian Alps. Long story short, Italy fights horribly against Germany up in the Alps during this time period. This is the darkest year of the war. 1917, Serbia out, Romania out, Italian struggles, Russian out of the war as well, or Russia out of the war. And lastly, the end of a two-front war. It's a tough time for the Triple Entente. They need one glimmer of hope, one good thing to happen. And guys, what they get, it's major. It's going to happen, it's going to occur April 2nd, 1917. All of the Entente dreams do come true. America is going to enter the war, April 2nd, 1917. Truth be told, America had been a major player, a major Entente ally the previous 2.5 years. American banks had contributed $2.2 billion to the Entente war effort. American factories churned out munitions, the weapons of war to help the Entente. But really the Entente, they need American manpower, and they need it pretty quick given their struggles in 1917. American President Woodrow Wilson is going to go to Congress April 2nd. He asks for and he receives congressional support to enter the war on behalf of the Entente. Let's discuss Wilson a little bit. Woodrow Wilson is a pretty interesting, complex man. Wilson was a dove, not a hawk. He was a dove. He was pro-peace. He had campaigned for re-election in 1916 on a campaign of peace. He told Americans, we will not go into this godforsaken war. A little bit of background information on Wilson. Again, he's an idealist. He is a moralist. He is the moral compass. He's a spiritual man. Let's discuss his background a little bit. Woodrow Wilson was the son of a Protestant minister. So he definitely kept faith very close to his heart. He found war to be morally repugnant. Okay, so he definitely was trying to avoid conflict and bloodshed and loss of human life because of his background as the son of a minister. Okay. Secondly, later on in his life, before he entered politics, Woodrow Wilson was the president of a major American college or institution, Ivy League. Wilson, great intellectual, was the president of Princeton. So really he arrived at these feelings about warfare intellectually, philosophically, spiritually. So the question is here, what happens? What causes the switcheroo? How does Wilson go in 16 from a dove to 17 as more of a hawk in his mentality? There are 5 chief reasons to explain why Wilson goes into war mode. Let me explain quickly. First, Germany is going to declare in 1916 and 17 a policy called unrestricted submarine warfare. Unrestricted submarine warfare. And it says this. It says any neutral boat, aka American boats, any neutral boats seen off the coast of England or Europe in the war zone, as they called it, could be torpedoed or shot down or submerged by German U-boats. It's a policy that said any neutral boat could be taken down by the Germans. That causes the Americans great consternation, great trepidation. Number 2, secondly, a lot of propaganda now being developed in 1916, 17, American artistic resources, propaganda being created against Germany because of the murderous romp through Belgium and because of the sinking of a certain passenger or pleasure craft. Number 3, as you know, American lives were lost aboard the Lusitania, and they became great martyrs for the American cause and for the Americans to enter World War I on their behalf. Thirdly, the sinking of the Lusitania does prompt the Americans to consider and eventually enter the war. Number 4, when Russia leaves the war, Russia and America were categorically different, philosophically, government style. Russia was seen as being a tremendous, horribly autocratic state. Okay, they were historically autocratic, an oppressive regime. Once Russia left the war, it gave Wilson more license to say, hey, Russia is gone, we can now enter and do it with a clear conscience. Lastly, it's called the Zimmerman Letter. Number 5, finally, the Zimmerman Letter. I'm going to leave that alone until tomorrow. I might actually prepare an activity for tomorrow based upon the contents of a letter called the Zimmerman Letter. Thanks. Have a great day.